In 100 days of game development every day, I managed to release 2 new games and enter 2 game jams, add several new enemies, bosses, and content to my long-term project, research and plan my next long-term project, release 4 new YouTube videos, create 1 failed prototype, make it to 100 followers on Twitter, and have YouTube game developer Vimlark stream and play one of my games.
Yes! Bravo!
Hi there, my name's Sean and I like to make games. 100 days of game dev is a challenge I decided to take up on Twitter in an attempt to grow my audience after battling a lack of motivation to keep making YouTube videos. I hadn't really developed an audience or felt involved with the community while making my videos. I just kind of plateaued with no real sign of growth after almost a year on YouTube. If you aren't familiar with 100 days of game dev, it's exactly what it says it is. To work on a small piece of game development every single day for 100 continuous days. Whether it be designing, developing, YouTube scripting and devlog making, or just dreaming up new ideas. From here on out, I will briefly cover each major segment of the challenge and events that occurred. So without further ado, let's go all the way back to August 25th, 2021. So if you're new here, for the last year and a half or so, I've been working on my major project Joust, an endless runner with precision combat. At the time of development, I only had a handful of enemies because most of the work was just developing systems, menus, and also learning about game dev for the first time. But after so long and a first major demo release, it was time to up the amount of content, double to be exact. In the first week of the challenge, I managed to drastically increase the amount of enemies with a whole range of new designs, including this frog, this hound, this spider, this thing that shoots arrows at you, and the first ever boss battle with this guy. With this much new content over a short period of time, my outlook on the game increased a lot, as I got to have fun with the game again, fighting and testing brand new enemies. I then wrapped up all this new content by scripting and releasing a new devlog all about it. So at this point in time, it was less than a week away from the start of the Vim Jam Game Jam. Instead of getting stuck deep into some more foot joust, I wanted to experiment a little bit. So far, I've only ever dealt with 2D, and wanted to expand to the world of 3D. I wanted to see how quickly I could whip up a trendy, oversaturated game idea. I wanted to create an endless procedurally generated roguelike dungeon crawling first-person looter shooter. Seems like everywhere you look these days, from the indie game dev community, everyone and their grandma is making some kind of roguelike RPG game. I wouldn't typically commit to a long-term project like this, but as a short experiment with a few days to spare, I wanted to see if I could sell out a tiny bit, but mainly learn more about 3D. In a short period of time, I learned how to make 3D rooms, movement, and prototype to pixel art style. Typically, most random generation works in evenly divided blocks, but I wanted to create rooms that I could just make any size and just make them check the space before spawning in to make sure there was no overlap. I got a bunch of rooms to spawn infinitely, but eventually got stuck at collision detection. I don't know what happened at this part. All the code seemed to be correct. Each room would just not detect objects right next to it when instantiated. This may be something I have to revisit later, but for now it was time to get ready for the Vimlark Game Jam. From the 11th of September to the 21st, I created and worked on my entry to this game development competition, hosted by one of my favorite YouTube game developers, Vimlark. I made a stress management simulator where you have to run around an office completing tasks with a dedicated stress meter. I called it Intern, an intern's guide to maintaining internal rage. After the jam was over, I spent the next few weeks playing all the other participants' entries and scripting my next video all about the jam. The jam was a life-changing event. I felt even deeper integrated into the community after this, with all the feedback I received and placing 25th place overall amongst 400 other developers. If you want to see everything that happened during that game jam in depth, don't forget to watch it after this video. At the end of all that, it took me up to about October 1st. Next, it was time for me to enter the next game jam, Ludum Dare, a short but even bigger game jam competition. I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted to enter this competition, as I was already starting to feel burnt out at this point. I only wanted to enter if I had some kind of solid idea. And then the theme was revealed, Unstable, which sparked 0 ideas. Getting distracted from the theme, I started to think about how cool it would be to make a Game Boy game. So I did, and then worked the theme around that later. The game wasn't the life-changing experience that the last one was. This game jam was just too big with thousands of entries. I never felt the community connection on this one. Gameplay-wise, the game wasn't the most interesting either, but I was happy with the art results rather than the actual game design aspect. That being said, it's another game under my belt for my portfolio and just more overall experience in general. After playing the other game entries and writing and releasing a devlog about Ludum Dare, I was almost halfway through the challenge at day 47. From here on out, all the way up to day 100, I mostly continued work with Joust, with some other things on random days, which I will cover in the next section. After a long period of side project, it was time to return to Joust, where it was time to wrap up the second level with its boss fight. This boss fight took me well over a week, as I had to redo it a couple of times, but I managed to get it done. I then proceeded to insert all the new enemies into the game to access through the selection screen, fixed bugs, animated the UI, and continued to make everything just work better. And then I finally moved on to the power-up system, which at this point of completing the challenge is nowhere near done. I've done about almost half of the power-ups, but have created the systems in place to be able to use them, as well as the player being able to shoot projectiles. So hopefully I will be able to finish them off sometime early this year. So due to the overwhelming success of Intern, I started to wonder if I could make this into a full release. The only issue was how. So at the time I was actually playing through Lucas Pope's Papers, Please and immediately fell in love with the game, and then continued to play Return of the Obra Dinn straight after. But specifically Papers, Please inspired me and made me figure out how I could keep a long-running game with unconventional gameplay types engaging in the long run by carefully scattering pieces of story throughout it. I decided that I needed to create a larger overarching story that can deliver pieces of information between and during levels through character interactions. This would also in return service the gameplay and help keep up the variety of levels and tasks for the player to do. So I started planning a story. I needed to do some research first, looking into shitty CEOs and real life scandals. I began watching the Netflix series Dirty Money and asking a friend of mine the plausibility of certain plot details that I was thinking about, which is all super secret for now to avoid spoilers for people. This project is still a long way off, but it would be nice to pre-plan everything before actual development begins, and also get some of those ideas down before I begin to lose them. And then that was it. I had 100% completed 100 days of game development. As you can tell by the large list of accomplishments, this challenge turned out really well, and I'm more motivated and active more than ever in the community, despite a small margin of growth on this channel. So I think the results really speak for itself. So if you're watching this video, I would encourage you to give it a go. Maybe if you don't do game development, you could make the challenge more about learning game development for 100 days. There were a couple of days I had to pause here and there, mainly because of this, and this, but I stayed pretty consistent through the rest of the challenge. Now, because I enjoyed the challenge so much and came away with great amount of growth, I decided I'm going to start the challenge again from day 101, starting early this year sometime. For now, I'm taking a small break from game development over the holidays before I get back to working on finishing Joust's power-up system. So there's been a lot of you supporting me on Twitter, or some of you that I've had general interactions with during the time of this challenge. So here's a bunch of really cool other game devs I would like to give a shout out to and thank you to, and who I would also just recommend following.